Hi there. So in this video we're going to discuss the section of the lecture that we didn't manage to cover in class because we were focusing upon the first assessment, which was the autobiographical essay. So in this short video we're going to focus upon the two popular streams of music, that is European and African American, that we're going to that's going to weave through the various lectures of the unit. So this fits into the third point on the lectorial aims that was discussed in class. So that's just to situate what we're talking about here in this video. So every aspect of popular music that is today regarded as American in character has sprung from imported traditions. And as I've been saying, in this unit we are going to concentrate on two broad streams that make up the many different styles of music, of popular music that we find in America and globally around the world. So let's talk about the first stream, which is European musical influences. Well, until the middle of the 19th century, American popular music was almost entirely European in character, as it says in the first point on the screen. Now, this has to do with the cultural and linguistic dominance of the British in North America. So remember that parts of the United States were originally a British colony, and then America became independent. However, British influences were still long-lasting in America. So this includes folk ballads and particular forms of dance music, which became mainstream and circulated with other styles of music coming into America. In the late 18th century, so the late 1700s, we have what's called strophic ballads that were based on traditional melodies. And these circulated around the States in North America via large sheets called broadsides. So broadsides tended to be the lyrics for particular songs, and broadsides were sold by people known as ballad mongers. Okay, so strophic means that these ballads would tell kind of stories, and they would use, strophic refers to the verses in the ballads that were used to convey the story or the narrative of particular songs. It was also during this time that there were other kind of developments and influences that were very important. So this notion of parks or pleasure gardens as the main venues for the dissemination of music, or printed songs by composers, became very important. So this notion of the rise in leisure activities and going out to the park to take a walk, and then the park becoming the venue where balladmongers and other composers could sell their printed sheet music. And later then, in the 19th century, we had what were known as ballad operas, and they became very popular. So, and they became popular because they were sung in English, and they had they included pieces of music that could be performed at home as well. So the rise in pianos in the front parlour also led to an important development in the rise of ballad operas and sheet music. This notion of storytelling to do with the ballad tradition, and also an aesthetic or a timbre known as a high lonesome sound, also comes from forms of British folk music traditions that became embedded within the American context. However, it wasn't just British influences, folk influences. Also the Italian operatic style known as bel canto, which is kind of a full melodic singing style became very popular. And indeed, in class today, we listened to a recording of Frank Sinatra, and Frank Sinatra is considered to have a bel canto style in popular music performance, so that it's very smooth and well-rounded. And then there was also dance influences, so people would go out to various dances and balls, for example, where they would perform kind of dances that were influenced by folk traditions, such as the quadrille and the reel and square dance, the waltz from Vienna, and other folk styles such as the polka from Eastern Europe and the fast step. And many of these were also couple dances, so again, the importance of kind of sociality and kind of socializing to do with these styles of popular music was important. Other styles other European styles to influence American popular music include Jewish klezmer music, as well as Cajun fiddling, Cajun music from the south of, again, European but also kind of Caribbean styles coming in, and the polka I've already mentioned. Various forms of religious music would result in call and response that would ultimately lead to the development of gospel music as an African American form, and Jewish klezmer music also influenced Jewish composers who worked in Tin Pan Alley in New York in the 1920s and 30s. So Tin Pan Alley is renowned for using the AABA format that we discussed in class. And we also have like old time music from the British Isles. So again, this reference to folk music being very important. But let's go on to talk about this link to kind of British folk music, and in particular the ballad tradition. So ballad is extremely important when we talk about the early development of popular music in the United States. And the ballad tradition is kind of the root from which many other kind of styles or genres of popular music stem. So this includes urban folk music of the 1950s, 60s and 70s, country music, and even rock and roll. One of the most important and widely performed ballads is a song called Barbara Allen. And we can date this song back to the 17th century. So it's a very old song, but a very popular song, and it's indeed still performed today by folk performers. Now, what makes a ballad is that it contains a series of verses or strophes, therefore it's known as a strophic form, and these verses collectively tell the story or the narrative of the ballad, the story. So each verse tends to be the same musical material. Okay, and that's so having verses with the same musical material that tell the story then is a kind of giveaway of the strophic form of a ballad. And if we look at this slide, this is the strophes or the verses to Barbara Allen. And if you go on to Moodle, you can listen to the recording, and if you listen to the recording as you watch the words, you'll see that it's quite a simple melody, and it's a very sad story that's communicated in this ballad. But you'll hear the same musical material, and as you go through the song, the verses shift and give you the sense of the changing narrative. So that's Barbara Allen and the British ballad tradition. So that's kind of the main influences of the kind of European stream that we'll be talking about and looking at as we go through the unit. But also the African American stream is extremely important. So between 1 in 2 million people from Africa, about 10% of the total transatlantic traffic in slaves from West Africa were forcibly brought to the US between the 17th and 19th centuries. And this then resulted in the latter part of the 19th century that there were almost 4 million slaves in the US. Now, it's misleading to speak of African American or black music as being just one form of music. So it's not what we would call a homogeneous entity. There are various local notions of local geography and kind of social and cultural conditions that have shaped many different forms of African American music. So African American culture took many different forms and influences from places such as Brazil and Cuba, Haiti and Jamaica, and also included various elements of European and in some cases American Indian traditions. So again, all these kind of different influences kind of came together in various ways. However, for many slaves in North America, music and dance and various languages, they served as a way to maintain identity in a time of slavery. So to maintain cultural traditions and also kind of hide aspects of indigenous culture within popular music forms. So when we talk about blending or kind of hiding musical elements, the idea of syncretism is very important when we discuss African American music. And in the 19th century there emerged many different styles of African American popular music, such as work songs, which would be performed by kind of African Americans working in the cotton industry or prison chain gangs. We had also lullabies and game songs, story songs, which took influences from the ballad tradition, as well as various instrumental forms. Now, one of the most kind of well-known and impressive forms or genres of African American music from this time are what's known as the black spirituals. And this was when black preachers or ministers started to develop a style of semi-improvised, musically intoned way of sermonizing that was very influential and would shape the performance style of African American performers later in the 20th century. So this includes people such as James Brown, to whom we listened in class in week one, and Ray Charles. So certain features that occur in black spirituals as well as in other styles of African American music, musical features include those that are listed on the PowerPoint slide, such as call and response, where a singer makes a call and then usually a group of singers or musicians then respond to that call. The notion of repeating musical phrases, interlocking repeating patterns, which are known as polyrhythms, syncopation, where rhythms can be off the beat, as well as timbral effects, such as a particular kind of buzzing to do with instruments, and vocal effects, such as humming and howling, can be heard. And we heard some of those kind of howling effects in James Brown when in the song I Feel Good, when we listened to that in class. So, we can trace African American influences throughout the late 19th century and into the 20th century, and we'll be doing this in the lectures that follow in this unit. So In week 2, for example, we'll be talking about minstrelsy and how white performers tried to dress up as black musicians and borrowed black performance styles but made them palatable for white audiences. We'll then go on to see how African American styles shaped ragtime and blues music, as well as the jazz music of the 1920s, and other later styles in the 1950s, such as rock and roll and rhythm and blues, and how this would eventually lead on to later styles such as soul in the 1960s, funk in the 1970s, and rap and hip hop in the 1980s. So I think that kind of concludes the discussion of European and African American influences and streams. So again, it's a very broad overview, and we'll focus on more specifics in lectorials as we go through the unit.